Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairytellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now.
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale.
Welcome back to the podcast. So excited to have you yet again for another episode. And we've got a lot of exciting announcements to get through before we get into the episode. So we're going to go and do that now.
Yes.
First and foremost, we, in some combination, either individually or collectively, have been guests on other fairy tale and folklore related podcasts in the month of March. 2 to be precise.
I'm like, what's crazy is, once this episode is published, this won't be true. But I was going to say we've been on other people's podcasts as much as we've been on our own podcast this year.
In 2024. That's hilarious. This is the episode that makes that not true.
Yeah.
But at the time of recording, it is true. And the first one of those is the Fairy Tale Fix podcast, where we talked about Irish folklore. That was one that Katrina and I did together.
Yes.
So much fun.
Kelsey and Abby of Fairy Tale Fix invited us to be on, and I was super, super excited. Anytime we get invited on to somebody else's podcast, I am thrilled. Just because it's like, I like listening to other people's fairy tale content, and to have them be like, oh, we want some of you on our, I'm like, oh, good. Because when I was listening to your podcast, I was talking to myself anyway.
So now I can talk to myself, but you will just so happen to be there
yes.
with me while I do so.
So what's great is Fairy Tale Fix, their podcast focuses on taking fairy tales, reading the stories, and having a good laugh as they're reading them about, some of the general silliness, and then also providing a fix for the tale, which is nice because I don't know if you guys remember the Taming of the Shrew episode that we did. But there are so many stories like that one where I will read it and I'm like, I hate everything about this. I want this story to end with this princess just punching this dude in the nards and leaving, just doing her own thing, running into the woods and living her best life. But instead, we just, we on our podcast, we retell the tale and then talk about the cultures that created them and so on and so forth. You guys understand because this is the podcast that you normally listen to. But if you want the excitement and the fun of rewriting, reinventing some of these tales or shooting around ideas, I feel like their podcast is such a great jumping off point for people who like writing fan fiction and retellings and stuff. It kind of gets those creative juices flowing of how would I change the story? How would it do better in a modern context? And it was super fun being invited onto Fairy Tale Fix. And I picked out 2 tales for us to tell that were from Speranza Wild. And it's funny because I joke on their podcast that I've always wanted us to do on our podcast a Speranza Wild episode, especially in the month of March. And it hasn't gotten on the schedule. It hasn't worked itself out. But for them, I did it.
Couldn't make it happen for our own podcast, but for someone else's podcast,
I'm going to pull out all the stops. And what was fun was we got to do 2 tales that were pretty different from each other, but also just...
That's an understatement.
Oh, man. I love the tale that you tell because of how it ends with this, what in the world? I think I'm trying to remember because it was like the initial reaction from everybody when you were done with the tell was like, I hated that.
Everybody was like, no, that sucks. What? Are you kidding me? That's how this.
No,
that's how this ends.
They put so much trust in the people that they invite on because they are like blind reacting to the story because they do this fun thing where they make like predictions of what the story is going to have inside of it. And so it's like they know that I have picked a story, I give them the title so they can make sure it's not going to be a repeat of a story that they've already done or that is on deck for them to do.
Because it would ruin them being able to make predictions about it when they were going to do an episode about it.
Yeah. But other than that, it's like, they go in not knowing like what this story is going to be. And so that's a lot of trust to be like, well, I hope this person did the assignment right and picked out a good and an interesting story.
Uh-huh.
And so I was so worried when like we got to the end and it was like, everyone's like, I absolutely hate that. Cause I was like, no, I know, but.
but that's the point of the podcast. You can hate it, but now you can make it how you want. And it like spurred really good conversation. And that's the thing that I love about their podcast too. Like it is a brilliant, amazing, like great just concept to build the podcast around. Like the whole, like even guessing and they're like, they get points. It's kind of like whose line is it anyway? They like keep track, but they don't keep track really.
Yeah.
In the episode they do, but they've got like on their, they've got a tease on their website that's like, oh, the prediction scoreboard, but it doesn't actually have. They're like, who knows who's got more points for it. But so that's fun. But then also like they're just two hilarious ladies, and like I love the commentary like throughout telling the tale, and then also afterwards, not just like the fix, but just kind of like how much more open they could be in that format to just be like, I absolutely hate that. Like we will talk about that too. Like, yes. We're like, oh, that's not our favorite. We don't like, but then we I don't know, just the way our podcast is structured, we can do that a little bit. Then we're like, okay, but here's like the context around this and why it was like that. And it's not great. And, but looking from this lens, but whatever, so it just like was really, really fun. And I've listened to several episodes of their podcast before we went on and since then. And yeah, just really enjoy them. They're just always hilarious.
Indeed.
So if you want to hear us on Fairy Tale Fix Podcast, it is episode 83, Classic Cross-Species Mpreg Situation, featuring the fairy tellers. And if that doesn't get you to want to listen to it, I don't know what will. That is a quote that came out of someone's mouth throughout the course of the podcast. And it is reflective of how messed up of a story it is that Katrina told on that podcast.
No, I love that they sent me a list of from the episode possible titles that they had come up with that they were like, this could work before they had, landed on that particular one.
That particular masterpiece of a title.
Seriously. There's a goddess for that. Mad freak. There was the guy who he kept going on his mad freaks, and I was like, me too. Evil liver, because I misunderstood the word liver, which I think is hilarious. Inside you are 3 kittens. The classic cross species Mpreg situation, which is the one that they went with. Pregante, he is not okay. God will get you. And then a hauntingly beautiful wop.
I forgot about that. Oh, man. Any one of those would have been amazing.
So that episode, super, super fun to record. Abby and Kelsey, lovely, lovely ladies. Their podcast, incredible. Go check it out. Not just our episode, but other episodes that they've done. Such a jolly good time.
Yeah. And, we really enjoyed it. And they were saying, probably out of just pure kindness, and hope we didn't ruin their podcast too much, that they were like, that we should do it again sometime. And that would be amazing. We would love to be back on the podcast. And we've been talking about having guests on our podcast. Have we ever done it? No. But we want to. And if we do, they're definitely near the top of that list to come onto our podcast as well. So,
indeed. Another podcast that's on the top of our list to have be on our podcast, but has not yet happened. But we've now been on theirs twice.
seems a little unreciprocated
Yes.
friendship type dynamic going on here.
It does. So Not My Fantasy podcast invited us back on to do an episode with them. Unfortunately, Geoff could not make it.
I was sad to not be able to make it due to scheduling conflicts that I've been assured by Katrina were not intentional as a way to keep me from ruining their podcast yet again. Just kidding. It really was just on me. And we were all very sad that I couldn't do it. But Katrina did it and had a great time.
I did.
Without me.
Super excited to get asked back onto Not My Fantasy. Well, this time we were discussing the Cinderella remake. They're doing
like a bunch of Cinderella stuff.
Yeah, they're doing like a whole Cinderella series, which we're no stranger to a good Cinderella series.
Oh, no.
But on their podcast, what they do is they look at modern media retellings of different stories, and they talk about the fairy tales and folklore that inspired those. And so the Cinderella 2015 live action Disney remake was what we were covering. I had never seen it before. So watching it so that I could talk about it on their podcast was the first time that I had seen this movie. And last time we were on their podcast, we had watched this like old French, like 1940s, like old French remake of Beauty and the Beast, which was like super weird, wild, crazy. Loved that I've seen it. I love that I've seen it. I will never be able to get out of my head the images from that film. But I absolutely loved being able to watch that Cinderella, like 2015. It was so good. The theme
it's
of
like
that.
The only live action Disney remake that I have actually liked, I think.
I really liked Aladdin.
I don't even think I saw Aladdin. I've been so just burned by the other ones that I did not like.
No, that makes sense. So you haven't seen the like, or that's one of the only like remakes that you've seen.
Yeah. And it is good. The Cinderella one.
It is. I mean, it was funny because one of the criticisms with like the writing that I know a lot of people had was just this like idea of like be kind and have courage was this thing that kept getting repeated so many times over and over that people were like, okay, the writing could have been like different or could have been like better. But this is a movie for children. First of all. And aside from that, what was funny was like, as we were discussing it on Not My Fantasy, it was really interesting because we talked about how much of the story was expanded out from the very Charles Perrault specific original, like the cartoon original, the Disney original. Like, and the stuff that was added to the story had a lot more in common with like the Brothers Grimm than the French. And so like that was a really interesting conversation.
That was one of the things that I noticed because I didn't see it like when it first came out in 2015 or whatever. Like I saw it probably like after 2019 when we had started the podcast and we'd done stuff and I'd really like heard the Brothers Grimm full story. And I was watching, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so much of the stuff from like the Brothers Grimm. And I knew that it was like based on the Charles Perrault, which that version I still have not ever read or, you know, have much familiarity with besides what you've said to me about it on this podcast. But it was just like really cool to see the, you know, the incorporation of that, the Brothers Grimm stuff that I was familiar with.
Yeah. Then what was interesting talking on like Not My Fantasy, it was how often with that movie, I kept coming back to like, oh, I really need to talk about this specifically in therapy. This is something I should probably discuss in therapy. Where I'm just like, because it was, man, such a good like conversation talking about the different characters' motives that you see inside of the remake, which is something that you don't get a lot of when you're looking at some of the flattened out characters that are very common in fairy tales. Mm-hmm. Fairy tales have these very like flat stock characters that, you know, they're pretty static a lot of the time too. There's not a whole lot of growth and change. They're usually like the same throughout the story. And so where people are expecting kind of like a hero's journey to happen or for some big lesson to be revealed. A lot of the times in fairy tales that, that doesn't happen.
Mm.
The only real change that usually occurs is like from rags to riches kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Like in Cinderella, where you have this woman who is
like
transformed.
Literally.
Yeah, literally rags to riches. Riches to rags to more riches. And so it's interesting anytime you're looking at kind of like a modern retelling of stuff to look at how they've developed motives for each of the characters. And it was sad for me to realize like how much of myself I could see in like Lady Tremaine.
Mm.
Like, I feel like for me watching, or not so much seeing myself in her, but seeing where I have some of the same like tendencies towards viewing the world cynically,
Right.
instead of what I would like, which is to view the world more compassionately.
Uh-huh. I gotcha. It was like not relating to her but like understanding her.
Yeah. And so it was funny because there's like one point in when we're like recording where I was just like, oh, this like one line that she delivers is so powerful to me because like I felt that so hard.
Uh-huh.
And I like go into it. I'm just like, oh man, maybe I should talk to a therapist about this instead of on like someone's podcast. But again, Cullen and Hannah, so fun to talk to. Those are the hosts of Not My Fantasy Podcast. They delightful. And so, yeah, if you guys enjoy humorous content, if you enjoy fairy tale themed podcasts, which I feel like you would, definitely check out Not My Fantasy Podcast. They also do YouTube. Both of these we will link to in our description of this episode, so you can find them. Incredible. Not My Fantasy, Fairy Tale Fix. We're so glad that they had us on, especially because our year and our lives are crazy and bonkers, and we're just getting through it. But being on those podcasts were just so fun.
And you say we're just getting through it, but also you are just beginning it.
Yeah. So an important announcement for moving forward this year. I have recently found out that I will be moving this year. So my husband's job is taking us from where we are living, West Coast desert. We're going to be going east. We are headed to the great state of Ohio. One thing that I'm excited about, Geoff, is from a thing that you told me when I told you that I was like moving to Ohio, is that you were like, Katrina, you are gonna love it because it is the most American place that you will have lived in the U.S. so far.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
You like went through it where you're like deep South Louisiana. No, you're in Cajun country. That's not America. Living in Texas for 11 months, you were like, no, that Texas is Texas. I lived in Utah. That's pioneer United States.
Right. And it's like, okay, obviously I want to say all these places are America, but it's like, you're going to live in like the most stereotypically like normal, what people in Europe imagine when they imagine America is Ohio.
Yeah. And then, because it's like, then I've lived in like the middle of the desert. And in a bonkers city. I live in Las Vegas.
Yeah. That's not a normal place.
It's not a normal place. It is not at all like a normal place. And it reminded me of this like one moment where I was with my husband. We were in Utah one summer. And it was not the 4th of July, but it was near the 4th of July. And I guess all these towns kind of have special days that they celebrate their town. And my brother was like randomly working in a food truck at one of these like city, like town festival holidays. So we went to go and visit him while he was working in this food truck. And there are all of these kids on these like blankets. They have like blankets like all over like the side of the road, like on the sidewalk and stuff. and because the fireworks were about to start.
Mhm.
And I'm looking down at all of these like children who are like eating like cotton candy and funnel cakes and stuff. And they're dressed up in like red, white, and blue. And they're just like staring up in amazement as these like fireworks are like going off. And I turned to my husband and I was like, can you imagine being a child growing up in the United States and like seeing this? And he like looked at me and he was like, yeah, I can.
Because he literally did.
He literally did. Because for me, when I was looking at that in my brain, what I was thinking was like, this is the most like American thing I feel like I've ever seen. It's just like a bunch of kids dressed up in red, white, and blue in the middle of summer on blankets, eating like fair food.
Uh-huh.
Like watching fireworks exploding. I'm like, that's America.
Heck yeah, it is. That's my America.
Anyway, so I am going to be moving in the summer. So the next couple of months are going to get crazy as I'm trying to move my life and my household and whatnot across the country. So we are going to try to be podcasting as much as possible during that time. But it might be spotty. It might turn into, it might be twice a month. It might be once a month. We don't really know at this point. But the other exciting thing is that I am also finishing up my school. This is my last semester at the school that I'm at right now. And before I go back to school in the new place that we are living, I'm going to have to take like a year off to establish residency. So while we might be really spotty getting stuff out there on the podcast, possibly for a year after that, after we move, we'll be more consistent. I'll have more time to go back to research, creating content, doing stuff. So we'll see. Guys, let's, we'll see.
We may even be able to accomplish Mermaid in 2025.
Oh, yeah, in 2025, yeah.
Yeah, 2025, not 2024.
Yeah, no. Don't nobody look forward to Mermaid this year.
That's the key to getting it done, is we can't get excited for it.
Yeah.
Because every time we've gotten excited for it, we haven't been able to make it happen.
Nobody get excited about it. You'll scare it away.
Exactly.
We're going to sneak up on it. So if we all just stay really calm and quiet, we might be able to creep up on Mermaid.
Speaking of creeps, I have an announcement. No.
I was like, we want to thank Andy for the new intro. Outro. We want to thank Andy Forey for our new intro and outro music, and we hope you guys have all been enjoying that. That doesn't need to be in there, but I wanted the option to be, speaking of creeps, and then we want to thank. Anyway, so all of those announcements and whatnot, and everything is exciting and crazy and wild and whatnot. We want to get back to our project for this year. This is going to be another Pourquoi Tales episode. So if you didn't listen to our first Pourquoi Tales episode, establishing this topic, that is episode 101, because this is how we decided to start off our next 100 episodes. So in that episode, I kind of laid out a list of several different ideas that we were going to be exploring through the year about why Pourquoi Tales are told. And today, the topic that we are going to be looking at is ancestral wisdom and codes of conduct. So, like we had said in episode 101, there are many, many reasons for why Pourquoi Tales can be found all over the world, because they serve multiple purposes in all of those locations. We were talking about like many stories overlapping in their purposes, and there's not one group that is like the only group that tells these stories for one reason. They're all mixed together. And so the purpose that we are going to be focusing on today, even though you'll probably be able to see some other purposes like laid out inside of the tales, we're going to be focusing on the abilities that Pourquoi tales have to pass on ancestral wisdom through generations of people so that they can kind of stay connected and cohesive like as a group. So the very first group that I mentioned when I was talking about this in episode 101 are the Aboriginal nations in Australia, and a lot of their tales from the dream time.
Love it. Love dream time.
And it's funny because I had thought that we had covered this in an episode before.
I thought so too.
Well, we like very briefly have like tangentially touched gently upon it when we've talked about it in the past. Because we told some tales that were like geomythology Pourquoi tales.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Geomythology, one of my favorite things. Sleeper hit of the podcast. And that's like a really early episode. We've had a few. We've had a few geomythology episodes.
Yeah.
Over the years. And there's always some of my favorites. I don't know why. The earth is great and rocks are cool. And people's stories about them are insane in many ways. Anyway.
Yeah. And when we talked about like those geomythology stories, and I believe it was like a geomythology story and like a star story, like at the same time, which was incredible.
Beautiful.
About this like baby carrier tipping out of a mother's like arms, like a star mother's like arms, and falling to earth. And it was to describe this one shape of a rock, but also what was interesting was that geologists have discovered that the crater that was created there it was an impact crater from something falling from the heavens, from like the sky, and creating that. And so it was one of those things where it's like, okay, we don't think that there were people who witnessed that rock that fell, because that rock that fell, I think in the episode, I would have to go back and listen to it, but it had fallen like 13 million years ago, something like insane like that. You know, where geologists can see like erosion that's gone around the rock, and that erosion has been there for a very, very long time. And so it wasn't believed that people had seen that particular chunk of space debris fall from the sky, but probably that the Aboriginal people who had like lived there had in their lifetime seen things falling from the sky.
Right. It's like they knew enough about that occurrence to extrapolate like, oh, like we've seen this happen here. Yeah. So it makes sense that the same thing happened here, but probably like even, I presume, bigger, or I don't know.
Yeah. Which is fascinating to think that they would come up with that story for that particular thing, because as a lot of people will probably know, I won't say everybody, I was like, as we all know,
as a subsection of nerds will know.
Yes. That like there can be really tall structures of rock that can be in certain locations for different reasons. For instance, like Devil's Tower. Devil's Tower was like what are they called? Like volcanic intrusions, where basically like magma surged up from the ground, but didn't erupt out of the ground. It was still encased in the ground. But as it cooled slowly into its like crystal shape, which are like these hexagon spires.
Yeah. So cool.
And as then the ground popped off of them, you have this massive structure that's going straight up into the air, but it wasn't formed from some spikes, falling from the ground. It was pushed up out of the earth. And so anyway, that was all to say that it's interesting that the Aboriginal people looked at that one rock that they had there and had a story about something falling to the earth. And that is how that got there, is that it fell to the earth. It didn't push up from the ground. Obviously, there's more ways that rocks can get high up into the air or whatever, or erosion can happen. But in that episode, I think we had talked a little bit about Dreamtime stories and passing stories on. And I think we've talked a little bit in like other episodes too. Oh, I think it was a bonus episode that we did about was it the rainbow snake?
Yeah. I didn't remember that was a bonus episode, but I do remember that episode.
Yeah. Cool. But back in like 2019, it's crazy because like 2019, it both feels like it was very recently.
Yeah,
And
like a million years ago.
Yeah, because it was
In dream time.
pre-COVID. Yeah, in the dream time. So back in 2019, I went to a friend's wedding in Australia. She's Australian, so is her husband. Hence why they decided to have their wedding in Australia, of all
where
places.
they live,
where they're from.
So weird.
Wild. And while they were there, I, of course, was enjoying wildlife watching, going to museums, looking at old bones.
Being told not to lick the wildlife.
Yeah, being told not to lick the wildlife. Fish in particular. And you know what? I didn't. I was respectful. It was interesting. I while we were there, we were constantly being asked to like not hit the wildlife with our car. Like the amount of times where people were just like, please be careful on the road and don't hit our wildlife with your car. As if that was like the whole reason why we'd come to Australia.
What? Oh, dang it.
I'm like, I was told as an American, I can hit whatever I want with my car. In America, we're allowed to hit everything with our car.
Freedom.
America. But yeah, it was like, don't lick the pufferfish was what I was told. And then don't hit their wildlife with our car. And we saw a lot of wildlife.
And every time you're like, oh, I want to hit it so bad.
Yeah, I want to hit it so bad. One of the creatures that that I'm going to tell you a story about, we did see from our car. And
nice.
we didn't hit it with our car.
Way to go. Proud of you.
But one of the books that I picked up while we were out there is called Daharwal Dreaming Stories. And this book, what was really interesting to me about it was that the authors were working with Fran Bodkins. And I know that Fran Bodkins does not sound like it's an Aboriginal name, but this individual is what's called a senior knowledge holder.
Ooh.
In the Daharwal community. And as a senior knowledge holder, she is responsible for like holding on to the community's stories and passing them down to the appropriate people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a concept that I find like absolutely fascinating, which is the idea of having people whose specific job it is to hold on to stories, to like hold on to like cultural knowledge, and to be in charge of like responsibly passing it on to people who are ready for it. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things that they talk about a little bit in the beginning of the book before they get into like the stories that there are is they talk about what stories contain, like why a senior knowledge holder is important and kind of like what their job is, what they're holding on to. And this one little proverb that they have, I think is really telling. It says, the safest place to hide is amongst those who are seeking you.
Mm.
And these stories were used as teaching tools within the clans to teach different things. And in the front of this book, they talk about the 3 things that the stories can contain. So all of the stories are supposed to contain layers of knowledge. And so the first layer are the secrets. And secrets hiding in this story are basically a way for people who already have the knowledge to reinforce the knowledge to each other. It's a way for those who have already been initiated into like the knowledge community to kind of like give a little wink to each other of we know what we're talking about. We know the secrets that we're mentioning and reinforcing to each other. But anybody who does not know, has not been initiated into this like group, they'll just hear the story and enjoy the story, which has made it easy to tell a story to somebody who's like coming in and being like, oh, I want to hear the stories that your culture has. And they'll give them a story and they're like, wow, that was really cool. What a cute little tale. What an adorable little story. Without knowing
that there's more.
So the next layer is knowledge within the stories about the laws that need to be obeyed in the community. And the laws that were in the story are often repeated after the telling of the story when it is being discussed among the people. And so for me, like, it's not an exact like one-to-one. I think of it as kind of like that moral. It's kind of the more like blatantly stated thing where you can kind of like look at each other and say just that little moral or like mention the main character of the story or something like, oh, remember the importance of the green toad or whatever. Like, remember the lesson green toad learned, and people will be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I've got it. I just use the word lessons at the end, like, oh, that's the lesson I learned. But lessons is like the third thing within it. And that the lessons are more of the things that are not like the stated moral at the end, but kind of the what qualities are being highlighted within the story themselves of like, this is what good behavior is, this is what bad behavior is. And it doesn't end up being like the moral at the end, but it's just kind of the stuff that is embedded, the cultural norms that are embedded like within the story.
Okay.
Like scattered throughout. And like those are pretty much like the easiest for anybody to get, to be like, oh, okay, this character was greedy and they got punished, and like, okay, we can see that like we like this person, that friend, or whatever. And so all of these stories are supposed to carry these like layers within them so that they can keep a like cohesive group identity. And that's why knowledge holders are important, because their job is like in the community is specifically to make sure that everybody gets these stories at one layer or level or another.
Right.
So that they can like share them within each other. And also to make sure that the sacred knowledge is understood by other people that will be able to then pass it on down the line. Because obviously, if that knowledge holder, the senior knowledge holder, dies without having shared any of the knowledge, well, what was the point of that? They're like, we're like pointless. And so there's this like chain of command, chain of a knowledge that's like going down along the lines. And I think that is really cool. It establishes insiders and outsiders to the community, making it easy to tell by the senior members like of the community who's an insider, who's an outsider, who knows our stories, who doesn't know our stories. But then it also is like not everybody has a right to the full knowledge of our stories. So the story that I'm going to be retelling is Wirit Jirabim, the First Lyrebird. And I definitely hope people look up what a lyrebird looks like when I'm done telling this story.
So you know never to believe the things that it tells you.
Because it's a liar. Lyrebird. They're a very unique looking bird. I will say that they're a very unique looking bird. They are excellent mimics. That is one of the things that they are known for, is being able to mimic sounds. And so you can also look up it's both humorous and also like a little sad to look up video clips of like lyrebirds songs, because they've changed over the years, especially if they're around human beings. Because there are lyrebirds that will mimic the sounds that cameras make, the like clicking sound, or like construction equipment, which I'm like, it's a little sad because they have the ability to
make like beautiful sounds rather than like the noise of construction.
Yeah, I mean, they have even used lyrebirds like in the past to record songs of birds that have not been identified, and so it's believed that they are the songs of birds that have gone extinct.
Oh.
And so they've shared, like, the lyrebirds have shared those songs with each other because they hear another one sing it and they're like, oh, that song's really beautiful, I'm going to do it too.
They're the folklorists of the bird world.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
No wonder you like them so much.
Oh, no wonder I like them so much. Oh, that broke my heart.
And now they'll be passing on the sound of construction from generation to generation.
Yeah, like that's because what's sad about it is that like they have a repertoire of sounds, but it's like a limited amount.
Right. Yeah, they can't remember everything.
Yeah, and so like if they drop one in favor of this new sound of construction equipment,
that which is something that no one wants more of in the world. That is sad.
Yeah, so it's like, please hold on to these ancient songs. But anyway, Ririt Jurabim, the first lyrebird. A very long time ago, there was a long drought, which if you listened to episode 101, you will have heard me say that it's really common for a lot of these stories to start off in some kind of distress. And food scarcity is usually one of the ways that the stories start off, because it's kind of like the most distressed that people can be, because it's like, if you don't have food and water because it's a drought, like what's the plan? Like, what are you gonna do?
Die, probably.
Yeah. That's the option. Just die. You either have to do something about it or die. So the people hadn't ever suffered like this before. This was kind of like a once in a generation food scarcity issue, once in a generation drought. Like a lot of the people, they didn't know what to do, but they were having to travel farther and farther distances to find enough food and water to sustain everybody. And the oldest people among them were getting weaker and weaker, and they weren't able to travel that far anymore. And the young children were becoming sick and also, didn't know how to care for themselves. And so old Wirit Jurabim, this elder woman of the community, which like it just makes me think of, like the senior knowledge holder.
Mm-hmm.
She was this old woman with silvery white hair and always ready to chuckle, which I'm like, I love that. I love that detail. That's like she, always was like ready, like with a laugh. She persuaded the people that they needed to start to make their way to the place of sanctuary. So here is where some of the secret knowledge could be contained. If somebody was telling this story to other people that they knew would understand the secret knowledge, and that is where the place of sanctuary would be, because they believed that these places existed and were like places that people could go. Right. And were sacred places, but that's not knowledge that they would share with just any person.
That makes sense.
But inside of the story would be a place where they could give hints and reminders to people of like where the steps were to get to that place. Mm-hmm. But if they're just telling it to like a random person that's like, tell me a story, they're like, yeah. They had to go to a place of sanctuary. And it's like, oh, okay. Whatever you say. That was me playing the part of
random person number 3.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yes. So she persuaded them that they needed to travel to the place of sanctuary where the spirit woman of the white flower was, so that they could tell her of their troubles, so that they could be blessed with water in abundance. So the people followed her because they weren't sure of where what was the place of the beginning, the place of sanctuary, the place of the beginning, meaning like the focal point of creation, the navel of the universe. So since the younger people did not know, the youngest among them, the children, had never been. A lot of the adults hadn't been there since they were very, very young, and so they didn't quite remember. So they were looking forward to like being able to go on this journey to this place that they had often heard spoken of in stories. Which I'm like, Inception, story Inception. But it said that some of the older members of the clan, they were not as happy to have to walk out there because, one, they were old. Two, they knew that along the way there were rough paths that they would have to follow because they had visited, more than once. But not wanting to be left out and miss out on the opportunity to, again, revisit the place of the beginning, they followed old Wirit Jirabim. And after they had gone a distance, there were dark clouds that started to form in the sky. And so at first they're like, oh, wait, maybe we don't have to go because if this is rain coming, then like our prayers have already been answered. And we didn't have to go that far.
Drought canceled.
Yep. We don't have to go and like worship and, do all this because it's already here.
Taken care of.
So they watched as these dark clouds started to gather around and, obviously we're getting excited that maybe this would be it. But after only a few drops of rain, it says barely enough to dampen the dry soil, the rain stopped. And then the fire spirits started to fight and throw their spears of fire at each other. To me, like hearing this as like a person who's like not initiated in this like religious world, I'm hearing lightning. Like that's what I'm like imagining is like these dark clouds gathering and it's like, oh, is it gonna rain? It's like, no, it's an electrical storm, which that's not great. I don't know if anybody's ever been in a drought and then there's an electrical storm, what's coming next.
Yeah. No bueno.
No bueno. And so as these spears of fire are flying around, some of the spears are hitting the earth and hitting the dry ground and leaves that are on the forest floor, and they're catching on fire. So pretty soon fire was raging all around and the people became trapped. They couldn't go much farther forward than the direction they were heading, but they also couldn't go all the way back. And one of the men in the group spotted a cave. It says high in the side of the valley. But Wirit Jirabim shook her head and was like pointing to like the cool green gullies that were like ahead of them. And if you're in this dry area and you see that there's like patches of green, there's water over there. Like, which is, I'm like, that is like a lesson. That's an example of like a lesson that's held within the story where there is cool, lush grass, there's a water source. Like there has to be like a water source nearby. That's not the law in the story. That's a lesson that's like contained within the story. And so she's pointing like, no, we don't have to like go up into those caves. Like we can lay down in these cool green gullies and be protected. But the cave was closer and easier for some people to get to. And because they were afraid, they panicked and ran off into the cave to go and hide. But the people who ran off quickly, they left behind the old people and the children. Who couldn't get there. I know. I'm like, oh, you left these vulnerable members of your community alone. And so Wirit Jirabim like quickly gathered together the children and the old people and led them down into the gullies. And she would place a child and then an old person in one of these like potholes in the ground, one of these gullies that were like full of like water and green grass. And she grabbed her grandson and went to put him in a very small hollow beneath the bank of the creek. It was the only spot that was like left for them. But she did not fit in with him. And so she put her grandson in that hollow and then disappeared off into the smoke. So as the fire raged overhead, the children and the old ones, they listened to Wirit Jerubim's instruction and remained hidden inside the water-filled potholes, just holding on to each other, waiting for the smoke to clear. Obviously, because they were near like water, like a water source, their air, even though like, so they were protected from like the smoke, and they were also they were protected from the fire, but they were also being protected from like the smoke filled air, because the moisture that was where they were like face down was like being like cleaned and controlled by that, which I'm like, that's a really interesting thing about fires, because like smoke goes up, and so like normally when you're trying to escape a fire, like in a house, you're supposed to like crawl like on the ground and get and like wet clothes in water and like wrap your face in it to protect like your lungs, which I'm like, they don't go into that here in the story, but I'm like, that is a better place than like being in a cave where you might be protected from the fire, but you're not protected from the smoke.
Yeah.
So the people, as the fire was like, you know, starting to like ebb out like around them where they were, the people who were hiding in the cave looked around in the darkness of the cave and suddenly realized, as the smoke was clearing, that the children and the old ones were not with them, which I'm like, a little late to be noticing that you left them behind. A little judgment. I'm judging you a little bit. And so even though the ground was still hot and there was still some smoke from the smoldering trees, they ran out to go and look and see if they could find the old people. And they saw the green gullies still down there, and that's where they found the children and the old ones safe, except that they could not find Wirit Jerubim. So everybody was like running all over the place, calling and calling and calling her name. And finally they got to a place. I think it's just funny because of what we know about like lyrebirds, is that as they're running, calling out her name, they heard her chuckle, her like the sound of like her giggling like laughter. And so they look over and they saw what looked like some like white hair sticking out of like some ferns. And so they, you know, were calling to her. And as they reached the clump of ferns, she was nowhere to be seen. And her grandson, who she had like shoved into like a hollow, he like hears her chuckle off in like a different direction. He like, you know, runs over to her, and he sees this like really strange looking creature. It said that its skin was brown and black, like Wirit Jerubim's skin, when the shadows of the leaves fell upon her. I was like, that's so beautiful, like that language of just like, oh, that looks just like her when she's in like the like the dappled light of like the trees. I'm like, oh, that's like gorgeous. Like to look at somebody who's like your grandmother and be like, oh, that looks just like her skin, like when she's in dappled light. I'm like, oh, just like beautiful, and noticing those little things like about a person. And its eyes twinkled, as did Wirit Jerubim's eyes when she played a trick on the children. This like just, I'm like, I love this woman. And the like creature chuckled just like Wirit Jerubim's voice. It said the creature began to dance just the way that Wirit Jerubim used to dance around the fire at night. And as she was dancing, as this like creature was dancing, they could see that it said around the shimmering white hair was a necklace of golden brown and black and white, just like the necklace of shells that her grandson had made for her and she always wore. Which, if you guys look up a picture of a lyrebird, it's like they're talking about on the tail of this bird, because it has what looks like if a peacock had been in a forest fire. And so like the tail feathers like are that mix of, so you've got like the white wispy hairs like that are like parts of like the feather, And also the like gold and brown and black and white, like the shells that they're talking about. And the people at first, when they were looking at this bird, they were so afraid that it might be something that was like bad or like, bad magic. But her grandson ran towards it, crying out his grandmother's name. And the lyrebird started to laugh with joy, and they could see the creature like recognizing like the grandson, and that calmed their fears, and they were able to all imitate Wirit Jerubim's steps as she led a dance around the fire. And this is how the lyrebird came to be, and that is why the lyrebird is the totem of the Darhawals. And so this is like, a lyrebird is more than just a creature.
Yeah.
It is an ancestor. It's one of their family.
It's such a sweet story. It's so, I don't know, it's like much more sentimental than these kind of like how this animal came to be stories, which a lot of them are like just really goofy and like,
Yeah.
like, oh, someone sat down on a pig and that's how we got a warthog or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And this one, it's very much, I mean, I had also talked about like how these stories, they'll include kind of a mixture of animals and people, sometimes just animals, sometimes just people. This one's like a mixture of the two because it's like a person that became an animal to basically survive.
Yeah.
Or it's like a reward for the goodness that was inside of this like person.
And it's, yeah, well, I mean, it's, sorry to cut you off, but
no, you're fine.
It's kind of interesting too that in this story, it's like you could see this like literally happening. You know what I mean? Like in the real actual world, like there was a fire, they ran out, like their people got left behind, but they came across this bird that had copied the mannerisms of this person. And it's like, like, I don't know, being able to be like, this person is gone. We lost them, but we still have them with us through this bird.
Yeah.
Because it is carried on, like, instead of construction noises and garbage like that, like the laughter of this person that we knew and loved, It's like, it's so great. It's such a great story. It's so sweet. And it's just like, I don't know, it incorporates the real life. Whereas like, again, a lot of these things are like, they're like somewhat anthropomorphized animals, like Aesop fable style, where they're like talking to the humans and things are going on and we're giving them human qualities. But it's like, no, they really are just describing the qualities of the bird, but the bird is, because of the way the bird actually is, has these things that incorporate the human elements within it, which is just like, I don't know, it's super sweet.
Yeah. I loved that story for kind of like what it highlighted for us in terms of like ancestral wisdom and connecting generations together through a story, because it's like this one is clearly saying like it's a Pourquoi tale of like how the lyrebird came to be, like the first lyrebird, but also it's saying like why this bird why we honor this bird, why this bird is our ancestor, why this bird is a symbol of our people.
Yeah.
And like what we as a group need to do to emulate this bird. Because it's like all throughout that story, it was talking about like the generations and what the generations kind of owe to each other. That you have like young people, or you have like middle-aged people, like you have adults who they see the burden of having small children, and they also see the burden of having elderly people in their communities. And when you only see those groups as like a burden, you are messing up, like you are destroying like the generations, you're disrupting them. And so you have the older generation looking after the younger, like, because hey, we're both these two vulnerable groups, but we need each other. Because it's like the old people being on top of like the younger people to protect them from the worst of this like firestorm, but also doing it together.
Yeah.
And then you have this grandson who is the one who's wise enough to see that the lyrebird has turned in, or that his grandmother is the lyrebird.
Yeah.
And I think like it's to me like such a beautiful story of the wisdom of how instead of seeing each other as like a burden, or like when you're in your most advantaged position as like a healthy adult, that you need to not abandon the people who were the healthy adults when you were the children.
Right.
And that like you owe it to these older people to take care of them. And we all have something to give and to offer each other. And so you can't view anybody as like a burden or somebody worth being left behind.
Mm-hmm. A lot going on in that story.
A lot going on in that story. And yeah, no, I like what you said too about that. Instead of it being like, oh, we see that like this bird or like that this animal has like these qualities. And so we're going to talk about how they, got punished. And I do have a story later that is a lot more like that of
and I still like those stories and love those stories, but it is like cool to see.
Nice to see the variety.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, everything just comes together so well. There's like, and it's hitting on so many levels.
Yeah.
Nuances.
And Aboriginal stories, it's one of those subjects where I love them so much. I know that there's so much more that can be got out of them, but I also know at the same time that most of the depth of them that could be got out of them is none of my business, and it will never be my business, and I'm not part of that cultural community. And so like I have no right to like demand that from them. And so any little bit, I'm like, oh, love it.
Soaking it up.
Yep. Even when the main message is, and the rest of that, the secrets of this tale, none of your business. So, as promised, when we, started the Pourquoi Tales project, and I had said, Aboriginal, Dreamtime, Ancestral Wisdom, and they're not the only ones. But my whole conceit of the entire project is that one group doing this, passing on ancestral wisdom, using Pourquoi Tales to pass on ancestral wisdom, and codes of conduct is kind of the other thing that we're focusing on in this like episode. Since one of the things that could be ancestral wisdom is the community codes of conduct, how we as a group conduct ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to show, they're not the only group. And so now Geoff is going to retell a tale from Africa. And more specifically, I believe this one, it was a Zulu tale. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Because something that I think we've talked about before on the podcast, but I will continue to stress because I know that it's a point of contention for like a lot of people. Africa is not the same all over the continent. It's a huge continent made up of many different countries, and then multiple groups of people that have existed inside of each of those sections and space for a very, 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 very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Cradle of civilization. Cradle of humankind, is that what it's called? Because it's like, this is where humans are from. So obviously, we've been in Africa for a hot minute. And so when we talk about like, oh, this story came from Africa, the tale will be very, very different depending on which area of Africa it came from, because some areas are not coastline, some areas have no desert, some are mountainous, some have vast river systems and savanna animals, and then others don't have savanna animals. So it does matter where in Africa the story comes from.
And this story is a Zulu tale called Why the Cheeks of the Cheetah Are Stained with Tears. And it begins. Long ago, a wicked and lazy hunter was sitting under a tree. Just like giving us some key characteristics about this individual.
Yeah, right off
from
the bat.
Start. Do you think we want to be like this person? Yes or no? Cast your votes now. He was gazing idly at a large clearing below where there is a herd of fat springbok, which I don't know what a springbok looks like. It's a type of animal. It's a prey animal.
People should definitely look up what they look like when they are running. There's a reason why they're called springbok.
I'm going to look one up right now.
They got mad hops. I'm going to tell you right now. And after that whole kind of thing that I went into, like about Africa, I'm like, important to know. So Zulu people, they are found typically, I mean, today the nation state that they are typically found in is South Africa. And so they're in the southern tip of Africa. And if people also look up what range you can find springbok in, that'll also... It's like same. So the reason why I had gone into that was basically to say, like, this story you wouldn't find in like West Africa.
Yeah, it's very specific to this location.
Yes.
Because of the way that it is, because of the animals that are there, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so there are these springbok there grazing around peacefully. Not a cheetah to be seen yet. Chekhov's cheetah. The hunter was sitting there thinking like, oh man, you know what? It's way too hot out here. I don't think I'm going to bother to just like slog my way through the bush trying to get at these springboks so I can, hunt and achieve the definition of what I've been labeled in this story. And suddenly he noticed some movement off to the right. And he was like, ooh, what's this? And it was a female cheetah who had also chosen this herd to hunt down. And she was doing very, very well. She was keeping downwind of the herd, moving closer to them inch by inch, creeping along so that when a springbok, a singular springbok, had unwisely wandered away from the rest of the main herd, wham! She launches off on her long legs, springs forward like an arrow, it says, with dazzling speed, races down upon the springbok and catches it just as it started to leap away. Because if she had caught it after it had started to leap away, this is my commentary, the thing would have been gone. They're excellent leapers. What they're known for. And so it says, panting from her effort, it's like showing you, it's like, this was tough stuff. She dragged her prize away to some shade on the edge of a clearing. And the hunter was watching this. He's like, dang, that cheetah is fast, marveling at the speed and skill that he just saw. As he continued to watch, he saw, very much surprised, that there were 3 beautiful cheetah cubs that were watching their mother hunting and waiting in the shade for her to return with their dinner. And so the hunter's like, oh man, jealous. He was so jealous of these cubs who were going to be like, just sitting there chilling like he was, but they're getting brought this delicious springbok to eat. And he's like, got nothing. And he's like, oh, you know what? This gives me an idea. I want a cheetah that can go out and hunt for me and bring me my dinner as well. So I don't have to do it. Because after all, I am a wicked and lazy hunter.
Yeah.
As we have established in the very first sentence of this story.
It's like, so how can I make this work for me?
What do you think he decided to do? Well, he decided that it would be easier for him to take one of these baby cheetahs from its mother and teach it to hunt for him. And so, chuckling to himself, he settled down to wait. And this is like a little aside in the story. After all, he was cowardly too, and did not wish to find out whether a mother cheetah would defend her cubs. So he's waiting for the mama to be away so he can steal them while she's not around, because she totally would pounce on him just like she did that springbok, and it would not be a good end for this lazy, wicked hunter. So as the sun was setting, the mother cheetah leaves her cubs yet again, concealing them in a bush so they'll be safe, and she set off to the water hole so she could get a drink because she was thirsty, because she was out hunting hard all day, running fast in the hot heat, because, the cool heat would be much more pleasant to be running around in.
Indeed.
And so, taking advantage of this opportunity, the hunter grabs his spear, goes over to the bushes where the cubs were hidden, and he found all 3 cubs, and they were too young to even run away. They're just like looking up at him. And he's like, oh man, they're all so cute. I don't know which one I'm going to take. I'll just take them all.
No.
And he's like, you know what? What's better than 1 cheetah? Obviously 3. So he takes every single one of them.
But it's also, I'm like, he's clearly not thinking about the fact that, like, before these become adult cheetah, they will need to be fed regularly.
Yeah.
Is he ready to
Uh-huh.
feed 3 hungry cheetah? No, he's not even willing to feed himself. I'm sorry. That's my
Yeah.
like brief aside of
That's
like,
a good
dude,
point.
what's wrong with you?
And it's like, hey, you know what's better than one mouth to feed? 3 mouths to feed until they get big.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man. Yeah, he really wasn't thinking it through.
Like that mama cheetah is like working her rear end off to like provide for those kids. And then he's like, oh, but I want the kids to provide for me. What? They can't even provide for themselves. What are you thinking?
They couldn't even run away. They were too young.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I'm sorry.
So-
This man, I'm like, not only is he like a lazy hunter, I also think he's a dumb.
Lazy, wicked, cowardly, and now stupid is added to his ever-expanding list of adjectives.
Stupid.
So when the mother comes back about a half an hour later and finds that her babies were gone, of course, she is brokenhearted. And so she started to cry and cry and cry until her tears made dark stains down her cheeks. And she cried all night and all the next day. And she was crying so loudly that she was heard by an old man who happened to be walking by and came to see, like, what is this noise all about? What's going on? And this old man happened to be very wise in the ways of the world, which is a much better adjective to have appended to your person than the other human character the story has gotten. And he had great knowledge and respect for animals. And so when he found out what had happened, why the cheetah was crying, he was very, very, very angry. Not only had this lazy hunter become a thief, but he had gone against the traditions of his tribe. Because everyone in their tribe knew that a hunter was only supposed to use their strength and skill, like their own strength and skill, in order for hunting. So any other way of hunting besides that was dishonorable. So the old man returned to the village and told the elders what had happened. And then the rest of the village got really, really mad at this guy too. And so they found this lazy hunter and they kicked him out of the village forever. Okay. And he drove him off. He ran away, never to be seen again. And the old man took the 3 cheetah cubs and returned them to their mother, who was very, very grateful. But the mother cheetah had cried so much that she had permanently stained her face with these tear marks down her cheeks. And so to this day, the Zulus say, the cheetah wears the tear stains on its face as a reminder of the hunters, as a reminder to the hunters that it is not honorable to hunt in any other way than that which is traditional. The end.
Excellent. I love a happy ending.
Where the wicked lazy hunter gets kicked out of the village and, is served his just desserts.
Indeed. So I hope it's obvious, like why this story was like picked for this subject, because I really liked the end when it was not just one other person that was like, oh, I think that's bad, but it's like the group saying, we as a collective, we as like our group of people have already decided that like that's an inappropriate thing to do because it doesn't adhere to like our code of conduct. Yeah. And if you're going to take advantage and like mistreat other animals, if you're going to mistreat animals, be disrespectful like in this way, try to cheat someone else out of something or use deceit to get your way. Like, obviously, we don't want you in our group.
Yeah.
Because if you're willing to do that, what else are you willing to do? Like, for your own self. And so I think that's a really interesting tale of then that, like, added bit of, like, and then when they look at a cheetah with, like, this tear stains on their face, it's a reminder not to make the cheetah cry.
Yeah. Hunt in the traditional honorable way and don't make cheetahs cry. And I love that it's like you were saying before, where that like the tear stains on the cheetah's cheeks become like this shortcut for a piece of this like cultural conduct that they can like remember. That you have these reminders, like the tear stains are like the scars of this bad thing that happened this one time. And it's like, and we don't want to contribute to that sort of like bad thing in the world. And interesting too, because I mean, like that is one of the characteristic things about cheetahs is those like long, like black kind of stripes that look like they're just like tears going down their cheeks. Which is really funny because cheetahs are we're big cheetah fans in this family. My children, my wife especially, and like my wife has like one of her huge pet peeves is like on like toy cheetahs or like even drawings of cheetahs. stuff like that, so often they don't have those like tear streaks on their cheeks. And it's like, no, that is something that like every cheetah has. That is like the characteristic things of cheetahs. I mean, it's not the thing that identifies a cheetah. But like you can like, even without them, obviously you can tell what a cheetah is. Cheetahs are pretty distinctive looking as far as like big cats are concerned. But she gets like very, very annoyed when like these toys and things don't have them.
That is super interesting that you pointed that out, because I don't think that I would have like.
Yeah, if you told me to draw a cheetah like before my wife had gone on these like rants, I wouldn't have even noticed or thought or remembered that was a thing either.
Yeah, because I'm like, I could have looked at any toy, and if it had like the kind of characteristic spots and tail and stuff, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's a cheetah. I'm like, that's like what that is. I like wouldn't have looked at that, because I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to remember like if there's like, because I'm sure that there's like an evolutionary advantage to like that, like being there, whether it's like sun reflection or
something. Yeah, because it has like dark fur around its eyes as well.
Yeah, because I'm like, I know that there's like animals where it is like a thing of like dark fur, like around the eye area, for the same reason that like American football players like will put a black around there so that it absorbs the light instead of reflects off, so that they can see easier.
But that also goes to show too, like that this story, like it comes from a place where the people would be like intimately aware and knowledgeable of these animals, because they interact with them much more than we do, you know?
Yeah.
In whatever way. So it's like, it's one of those things that's cool too, because it is like, of course this culture would know that about cheetahs, because again, it's like they're an animal that's from where they are, where they're interacting with them a lot. And it's just like, again, that's kind of a cool thing. That's something that lots of people forget, as pointed out often by my wife. Like they would not forget. They know. That's like a crucial thing.
Yeah. Man, and it's also interesting too, because I think of like, oh, if you replaced it with a different type of like savanna cat, the story, it wouldn't be the same either. Like if you were like lions or something. Yeah. I mean, not because I'm like lionesses, they don't have like the tear stains on their face, but I mean like personality wise too. Cheetahs, their personality is so different.
Yeah. And they're not like, I don't know, not that this is the appropriate word for lions either. They're not like pack animals. Like lionesses hunt in a pack. They're like, they have their prides. They like have a group that they're with. Yeah. It's like, whereas cheetahs are very solitary, and it's like the only time when they're not is like they get together to mate real quick, and then a mother raises the cubs, but they very quickly go off on their own too.
Yeah. And it's like lion moms, they're together. They're in a group.
Yeah.
They raise their kids. Like all the ladies, even if they are childless ladies, like aunts are also like helping to like watch and protect the kids, bring in food for like everybody else. Yeah. And so it's like this story is very like, cheetah specific, where it is like not just the like very noticeable like tear stains on their face, but the fact that it would be this like a single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops. Would it be an episode of this podcast if I didn't just randomly remind myself of a song? No,
it would not. Yeah, but it's like it couldn't happen with another animal, and it again just shows what we were talking about earlier, that they were very familiar with the physical characteristics and the behavior and the life cycle of these animals.
Yeah, and I love that it is a what you had said of like the looking at a cheetah. If they saw a cheetah, saw its tear stains, it's a shorthand for remembering the type of person that you need to be. Yeah. Like remember the lessons that we've learned of who you need to be and the code of conduct that our group follows.
And it's also interesting too, because in the story, the lazy hunter, he like looked up to the cheetah as like such a good hunter. And so it's one of those things like this animal that you think of as being a really good hunter that hunts the same type of food that you do.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like I want to be like that animal. That animal is a good hunter. And that animal also carries like the warning of like what happens when you are not an honorable hunter. And it's like, and I don't know the reason why, that's like a rule in their culture or whatever, but it's like I can think of lots of reasons why it would be. Because if you were to like, again, use methods like beyond your own strength and skill to hunt, like you might overhunt and you would like unsustainably be killing off animals, and like there wouldn't be enough for everyone to eat, or even like the animals around you to eat, which would have like cascading effects. It's like,
Yeah.
There's an important. It was important to them that this, so important to them that this like code of conduct be enforced, that they were willing to kick somebody out because he did not follow it, even though the thing that he did, like, I don't know, I feel like I guess just like personally, I don't even want to say like my culture, but I guess because I feel it personally somehow got it from my culture. But it's like, if you've done something and like it can be reversed, like it was made right, like the cubs were returned, and like and I guess the emotional damage to the mother was not like completely fixed, but you know what I mean. It was like it was restored, and that in lots of places, like to me, would mean something. It's like, okay, because we were able to like make it right, like your punishment that you would receive would be less because you could reverse some of the damage that you did, But it was like, but even then it was bad enough that guy had to be out of there,
Yeah. No, because I think too, I mean, talking about like, oh, this is like an important rule because of like over hunting. Like if you over like hunt, that'd be bad. I was thinking of, there are a lot of like Inuit stories that have to do with, and this like fits in really well, like the ancestral wisdom of like they have rituals that they will do after they have like killed an animal to release its spirit back into the land of animals, so that another animal can then like come and replace its spirit. And they believe as you show respect, you're able to keep this like flowing. But when you don't show respect, you're only ending up hurting yourself in the end, because you're going to run out of animals. And so like that, those cautionary tales of like what would happen if you do not, like it matters very much, like having that respect for the thing that you are killing or those that you're sharing the land with. But thinking about the question of like, oh, it seems like severe. To me, I think about if that person in your community is like willing to do something like that, you worry that they are a liability to you as like a culture, or like you as like a group. And so it's not like a thing of just like, oh, well, they were able to like make it right. And so like no harm, no foul. Like,
but they showed the type of person that they were.
Yeah. And the type of person that they are is a danger to the community as a whole.
Yeah.
And so you're like, if we're all going to make it, you got to leave, because like if you're not going to like do the honorable thing, if you're not going to follow our codes of conduct, then like we need you going.
Yeah.
So this story is from the Iroquois nation in the North American continent. And what's interesting too, when talking about the Native American and First Nations stories on the American continent, is same thing that I kind of noted on the African continent, which is it is a vast expanse of land with a lot of biodiversity, geological differences in like the area. Even like this types of like storm systems, because like, did you know like tornadoes are kind of a uniquely American phenomenon, because
like especially the way they happen here.
Because they can only form like on a flat land where like there's a convergence of like the type of like moisture fronts and stuff like that. So it basically is like the only place that those storms like exist regularly on Earth is the American continent, which is like
mind-blowing to think like there's not another place like that on the planet. Like, but tornadoes do happen other places apparently, like in the same way that like tornadoes happen where I live. Occasionally it's like where the wind gets, and it like happens like in a super isolated place, like really quickly, like up and down. But it's like you don't see a huge tornado like that barrels across like miles and miles of land. It's kind of like a down and up kind of a thing.
Yeah, because it's like they even have, like they'll form like over water every now and then too, like form like the like spouts and stuff. But anyway, like in the Americas, it's another situation where you'll see a lot of creatures in the stories around the coast that are coastal animals, go figure. But one thing to note is, again, like in like Tales from Africa, the people who had trade routes, basically anywhere where there are trade routes, there is a sharing of ideas, sharing of stories. And so in the same way that there are places in the Southwest where there have been artifacts that are found that are from Mexico, where it's like parrot feathers and cocoa like nibs. It's like, how did this get here? And it's like trade routes. There were like vast like trade routes. And so in some of those ways, some of the stories like do share across, but a lot of the stories are place specific and like locale unique. So something to think about. But this story is called Why the Owl Has Big Eyes.
Ooh, I'm excited.
This is like a genre of stories that, again, it's to teach like a code of conduct in this story. But I don't know why. I just really, really enjoy the stories of they're like creation stories of like there's a creator deity, but he basically gives you the features that you get because of your bad behavior. Either because of like your bad behavior or somebody's really good behavior, but usually bad behavior. And so there are several stories that I have seen from America, specifically from different nations, that are how certain animals got formed by like a creator. And so often they include a jackrabbit, but I've never seen jackrabbit included in quite this way. But I greatly enjoyed it. So, Why the Owl Has Big Eyes. So, Rawino, the everything maker, so creator deity, was busy creating all of the animals. And at the moment that this story took place, he was working on Rabbit. And the creator had kind of like a deal with the animals that he would give them the features that they wanted, which was actually very unique in this story. Usually I've found that they have in their mind like specific gifts that they want to gift to a creature because of like an innate quality that they have or something. Right. But this one was interesting because he was trying to give the animals what they wanted like for themselves, which I thought was interesting. And so Rabbit had said, I want nice long legs and long ears like a deer. And I also want sharp fangs and claws like a panther, which I'm like, can you imagine? That's like more terrifying than a jackalope. So anyway, I was like, oh, geez. And so the creator deity was like, of course, I like to give to animals what they want for themselves. And so he started to work on Rabbit's hind legs, making them nice and long, just the way that Rabbit had ordered them. But Owl, who was sitting nearby, unformed. So I'm like imagining like, but what does that mean?
What did it look
unformed?
like? Yeah.
Like in spirit, or like he was like kind of like a little lump of fluffy
Flesh
clay, or yeah, I'm like, But Owl was sitting there unformed, and already he was just like sitting there, barely like didn't want to wait his turn, was just like chomping at the bit to like go. And he had this like long laundry list of things, and he was like, he keeps including the hoo-hoo, I want a nice long I want a nice long neck like swans. I want beautiful red feathers like cardinals. And I want a nice long beak like egrets. And I want a nice crown of plumes like herons on my head. I want you to make me the most beautiful, the fastest, the most wonderful of all of the birds. Which I'm like, if everybody asked for that, that would just be so exhausting. Like, I'm just like imagining, like if I had that deal, like, oh yeah, I'll give you whatever like you want. And then where does it stop is like what I'm thinking, because like the animal that went first that thought like, oh, look at my bright red feathers. Like I'm really cool looking animal. And then somebody else is like, oh, I want those red feathers and I want a racing stripe and I want super long, like, it's just like, okay.
And the
like,
fangs
this
and
is
claws
getting-
of a panther.
Yeah. It's like, this is getting like totally out of hand. So anyway, so Owl is just like going on nonstop about the different features and the things that like he wants. And the creator was like, okay, can you be quiet? Oh man. He's like, can you be quiet? And I need you to just like turn around and look in a different direction because like you're bugging me. You're
Turn your head
like,
180 degrees around completely backwards and stop looking this way.
yeah, stop looking this way. Like stop looking at all the other features from like all the other animals and just like rattling off that you want like all these things. Like stop talking, stop watching what I'm doing and like worrying about like all these other animals. Even better, just close your eyes. Because don't you know that no one is allowed to watch me work? So the creator turned back to his work to make Jackrabbit's ears nice and long, which I love. There's so many tales about how Jackrabbit got his big ears, and I love all of them. But anyway.
But this one is, he wanted them. And so
yeah.
he got them.
Yeah. And this one, he wanted them. They're not a punishment. So the creator turned back to start working on Jackrabbit's ears to make them nice and long, just the way that the rabbit had wanted them. But Owl just refused to be respectful and listened to the creator. And he was like, hoo-hoo, nobody can forbid me to watch. Nobody can order me around. Nobody can tell me to close my eyes. If I want to watch you, I will. And the creator getting angry and frustrated by this, like, just rude behavior. Absolutely rude. I'm like, the person that's going to give you everything that you want, if you just be quiet for a little bit and like wait. But he's like, instead, he's like, nobody can tell me what to do. And it's like, oh, I think you will find that someone can tell you what to do. So the creator, getting finally totally fed up, grabs Owl and pulls him down from his branch. And it says, stuffs his head deep into his body. You know, like just be like,
yeah. Squishes him down. Small.
Shaking him until his eyes grew big with fright, pulled at his ears, because this is like a screech owl, pulled at his ears until they were sticking up at both sides of his head. There, the creator said, that'll teach you. Now you won't be able to crane your neck to watch things you should not watch. Now you will have big ears to listen when someone tells you what not to do. Now you have big eyes, but not so big that you can watch me, because you'll be awake only at night and I work by day. And your feathers won't be red like cardinals, but gray like this. And the creator rubbed Owl all over with mud as punishment for his disobedience. And then Owl flew off pouting, hoo, hoo, hoo. So the creator turned back so that he could finish his work on Rabbit. But Rabbit, having seen the creator in his full anger, was so scared he had already taken off running with only with only his big back legs and his long ears, but without the sharp fangs and claws that he had wanted.
So sad.
And it says, had he not run away, then Rabbit would have been an altogether different animal. But as for the owl, he remained shaped by the creator's anger, with his big eyes, short neck, ears sticking up on the side of his head. And on top of everything, he has to sleep during the day and come out only at night.
That's so funny.
And so I'm like, that one is like, I feel like much more kind of like what people imagine when they think about like Pourquoi tales, especially and this is how this animal got like this feature, but also it conveys the wisdom that the group, wants to teach like the people like in the group, which is
you get what you get and you don't throw a fit.
You get what you get and you don't throw a fit. You like follow rules, especially of like those who are in charge, those who you owe respect to. Don't be thinking to yourself, "Oh, I don't have to follow the rules. The rules don't apply to me. I think that I'm very important, therefore I don't have to follow the rules." And it's like, "No, usually the rules are in place for like a reason." I mean, in this story, it's like the creator's like, "I don't want people watching me like while I'm working, while I'm doing what I'm doing." But there are other rules in life that are there for your safety, that are there for basically for things to be fair for everybody, or like at least closer to equitable like in society. And so it is like important as a group that we remember to like be respectful of those that are like in charge or who have earned respect, and to follow the rules that like everybody's kind of agreed upon so that you can all like function together. And when you get terrified, remember to run back over so you can get your claws and your fangs. No.
That's my favorite part of that tale is like the Jackrabbit B story about like the jackrabbit that could have been.
Yeah, where it's like if he hadn't run up. Because yeah, it's like the story starts off with this thing where you're like, that I know that that's not going to end how it's going to end, because, if it's like, oh, the creator was working on Rabbit who wanted long ears, big hind legs, and I think that it wanted long legs.
Long legs, yeah, like a deer, but it only got the back ones.
And it only gotten the back ones done, yeah. And so then it just had to like hop everywhere. Oh man, what a terrifying creature would be the jackrabbit that has like long legs all over, so it like runs after you and it has like fangs and claws. Yeah. Oh my gosh, somebody draw that cryptid.
Ooh. The thing I like about this story, besides like this horrifying rabbit that could have been, is also how like the personality of owl is so different from other like personifications of owls that I've ever seen, like being like they're very wise, they're like like they're quiet, like, well, not the sounds they make a lot of time, but it's like we like think about they're like silent, like assassin hunters.
Yes,
not necessarily in stories, that's just in real life because they're like feathers are crazy, but it's like again like the wise owl, it's like it doesn't seem very wise of this owl to be behaving the way that he was behaving, and it was not wise, which is just so funny because it's like, oh yeah, like the perception that I have of owls is informed by my culture and the story that my culture has told about owls, and not all cultures are talking and thinking about owls in the same way.
Yeah, no, and it's really interesting that you bring that up too, just because like there are other stories from different regions in the United States where owls kind of had the same job as like banshees, where they would call out the names in the night of the people who were going to die. And then others where it was like they were seen as the guardians of like the gates toward the Milky Way, which is where spirits would go when they died. And so there's this association with like owls' death. But then there were others where it was owls were seen as like a symbol of like love and couples and like long lasting relationships. And yeah, and then like what you're saying of like being wise, being advisors, people who like give good warnings, things like that. And I think about like the owls, because when I'm thinking about the screech owls, because even when I was reading the story and they would like, and he was like making the ears long, I had to readjust in my head because
the owl that you were picturing.
Yeah, because the owl that I was picturing are the little like burrowing owls.
Well, I was picturing like a barn owl with like a very round like head.
Oh, because I'm like, out in the desert, we have burrowing owls. And so they're very, very short. They're very like small, skinny, and they live in vacated holes. Or if you live in like a city or near a city park, they live in like drainage pipes. And
Ninja Turtles of the desert.
Yes, Ninja Turtles of the desert. And so like in my head, I'm picturing that, and they are, because they're smaller, they're a little skittery, like they're little, they're scared.
Yeah,
a lot.
they're smaller. Like, so they're more afraid of other things that could be, and they live like on the ground. They don't have the safety of being like up in the tree.
Yeah. And so like, I can't imagine my burrowing owls acting the way that this owl in this story did.
My burrowing owls would never behave so appallingly.
They would never. Because they would be very much like, oh, when you have a minute, when you have a spare minute.
Yeah, they would have asked to be a little taller and able to find better places to live.
Yeah. So, I hope that everybody enjoyed our installment of our Pourquoi Tales research. I'm excited for like more of the episodes to like dive into it. I thought these were some really like fun ones. I was going to say also, we're probably going to do some episodes that will not technically be like Pourquoi Tale series episodes, like, because they won't be following our like why of Pourquoi Tales like ones, but they'll be kind of these like tangential topics that are related. Super excited that we can cross off this like first one. We're probably going to be seeing other stories that include ancestral wisdom and codes of conduct, but we have a lot of other cool and interesting why reasons for these tales coming up in the following months.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories, an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin.
Yeah, boof that Dayquil.
Oh, I will. I will not boof my dog.
Yes, please don't. What?